On behalf of General Myatt and the Marines Memorial Association, I want to welcome you to today's event honoring our veterans of the Battle of Iwo Jima. My name is Colonel Chris Starling, and I'm the Director of Military and Veteran Affairs here at the Marines Memorial Association. And this is a veterans organization that is chartered to honor the legacy of military service with programs that commemorate, educate, and serve the currently serving veterans of all eras, as well as the community. I'd like to offer a few words of thanks quickly. First, to our honored guest, Brigadier General Chip Bierman and his wife Beth are here from MCRD San Diego. I'd like to thank Dale and Mary Cook for helping to organize this, get the word out, and also we have a few mementos that we're going to give to our Iwo Jima veterans after the ceremony, and also our good friend Ed Flowers, who helped also in organizing the event, as well as our awesome Marines Memorial staff from our catering department, our bartenders, our servers. We really have a great team here. It's a family effort, and I'd like to thank them for the work they've done. I didn't know that the final two Japanese to surrender on Iwo Jima did so in January of 1949. Now, you've all heard the stories that, some of the Japanese were a very determined enemy, and on a lot of different islands in the Pacific, they went to ground, and they didn't believe or didn't know that the war had ended, and they kept fighting. In the case of Iwo Jima, in January 1949, 2 Japanese soldiers surrendered themselves to occupying U.S. Army garrison on Iwo Jima. So who came in and did the garrison work after the Marines took the island? Our friends from the Army. Anybody from the Army here? All right. We love big Army, so I'm not going to say any more. So these two had hidden inside the 11 miles of tunnels and bunkers and caves in Iwo Jima, successfully raiding U.S. Army supplies for food and water at night. They had found a Stars and Stripes newspaper that showed pictures of GIs celebrating New Year's Eve in downtown Tokyo, and that's how they knew the war was over. So they reported to surrender in full uniforms, well-fed, and with clean, fully functional weapons. That was a determined enemy. March on the colors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Post the colors.
I was a machine gun section leader, made 3 assault landings as a machine gun section leader. I missed one of the islands because I got wounded on Saipan, but I made it through the rest of them. Anyway, Today, as I understand this program, we reminisce quite a bit, and especially in view of the fact that we have the Iwo Jima people here, I thought of a memorial type service for you, so please bear with me. And so we sang, when you pin the poppy on and remember those who died, remember, too, the men who fought beside them and survived. They came home to start again, but struggled with their mind to forget the horrors of the days and the hell they left behind. Wounded, though they did not bleed, they cried for close friends lost, but fought on bravely for their new freedom was worth the cost. Though they are old and scarred for life, they suffered for us all. And in their dreams, the battles raged and fallen comrades call. So when you hear the honor roll, the names of those who died, remember, too, the men who fought beside them and survived. Oh God, we ask your blessing on this as we come to the fulfillment of our days, as we strive for our joyous reunion with you, for loved ones and all the blessed in your kingdom. Sustain us with your strength in times of trial. Be with us in our daily lives and lead us to the peace that only you can give today and always. Now, with the strength and mental capacity that you afford us, we ask for that same peace for our comrades whom you have called home. We thank you for the wonderful times we spent together, always depending on your blessings. As we salute our comrades whom you have called, we are comforted with the knowledge of your word, that you are rich in kindness, loving and forgiving. And with that confidence, we surrender all to your care. Amen.
General Bierman was 1 year ahead of me at VMI, so I'll save all the hazing stories for later. But we went to the same amphibious warfare school class back in 1995-96. We served in Iraq together in 2003, and as a lieutenant colonel, General Bierman had commanded a battalion. He was one of the few battalion commanders to deploy his battalion to both Iraq and to Afghanistan. And later he commanded the 3rd Marine Regiment out in Hawaii. General Bierman has a family connection. His grandfather served on Iwo Jima. So I thought it was appropriate to invite him up here. We're thrilled to have you and Beth here for the day. And with that, I'll turn over the podium to our guest, Brigadier General Chip Bierman.
Hey, Chris, thanks for that introduction. You're never disappointed when you get introduced by Chris Starling. Hey, fellow Marines and veterans, those of you who fought on Iwo Jima, and those of you who had a family member here, let me just tell you what an incredible privilege it is for me to be here with all of you at this event. I want to take also just a second to welcome the leadership of Recruiting Station San Francisco that's sitting over here at this table with my loyal aide, Captain Martin Thomas. But that's Major John Frericks and Sergeant Major Larry Lechty. Like I said, the CO and Sergeant Major of Recruiting Station San Francisco. And I'll tell you all, there's no group more representative of the warrior mindset of the Marine Corps than our recruiters. They pump the lifeblood of our Corps, and I'm very, very proud to serve side by side with them. And I also want to thank the members of the 23rd Marines Color Guard for doing a real bang-up job up here. Well done. Hoorah. In the course of his memorial dedication of the 5th Marine Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima in 1945, Rabbi Roland Gittleson said this: "Our poor power of speech can add nothing to what these men have already done. All we can even hope to do is to follow their example." As I stand here with all of you on this Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco, I'm very mindful of Chaplain Gittleson's words those 71 years ago. They were very much on target. But I'm also one of those among many who believes that the story of Iwo Jima must be told and retold. For a United States Marine, Iwo Jima is not just a battle story, it remains the battle story of our Corps. As the commanding general of MCRD San Diego, I can assure all of you that every single Marine graduating from boot camp knows the story of Iwo Jima by heart. And we don't just leave it there either. During the graduation color ceremonies that occur most Friday mornings at the depot, we take the time to tell the family members of every graduating company about the battle and its meaning for today's newest Marines. It's always fun to tell that story and then to see the families sit up a little taller when their sons are compared to the heroes of Iwo Jima. So for the Iwo veterans who are here today, and I'm so honored to be in your presence, I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience and forbearance. In order to honor your sacrifice and service, I need to talk about the Battle of Iwo Jima, but in the process, I'm going to try very hard not to fall too much into the trap of telling all of you your story. Even by the tough standards of World War II, Iwo Jima was unique. The stage had long been set for a battle that would be unmatched for its savagery and ferocity. Veteran Marines who fought their way across the Pacific would later claim that Iwo Jima was truly in a class by itself. Those of you who fought there, you faced one of the toughest and most impenetrable defenses that were faced by Marines in the entire Pacific War. For the 23,000 Japanese on Iwo Jima, the defense of that island represented nothing less than the defense of hearth and home. Iwo was Japanese soil. It was located 650 miles from the home islands, and it was actually part of the Tokyo prefecture. The mayor of Tokyo was the mayor of Iwo Jima. No foreign army had fought on Japanese soil for 5,000 years. The highly capable Japanese commander, General Tomichi Kobayashi, he repeatedly emphasized to his men that if they could extract a high enough price for Iwo, that the Americans might well give up completely on the idea of attacking the Japanese home islands in the future as too costly. He urged his soldiers to sell their lives dearly and to take 10 Americans for each Japanese death. One Marine Battalion commander and Medal of Honor recipient, Lieutenant Colonel Justin Chambers, he later remarked in the early days of the battle, the Japanese soldiers clearly exceeded their commander's requirement. These dedicated Japanese soldiers were pitted against the veterans of the 5th Marine Amphibious Corps, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions. They were the best of American men who had been trained as Marines, and they had been taught never to give up until victorious. And they faced an equally committed enemy determined to make the Marines fight, pay, and bleed for every inch of black sand. The arena where they would square off was tiny and compressed. 100,000 men were packed onto a tiny 4-mile island, 2 miles wide by 4 miles wide, 4 miles wide by 2 miles wide, an 8-mile square island. One historian put the battle in context by saying, it took the Marines 36 days to slog that 4 miles. Iwo Jima was the most densely packed battlefield of World War II. 100,000 combatants embraced in a death struggle over an area smaller than 1/3 the size of Manhattan Island. It's since been said that the fight for Iwo Jima can be divided into 2 distinctive parts. The battle for the southern half of the island, including Mount Suribachi, and the battle for the northern half of the island. And you know, that probably makes a lot of sense, and it's very apparent in hindsight. My guess is for those of you who were there, it probably all just seemed like a never-ending series of exhausting, bloody, grinding, bare-knuckles individual actions. But the battle for the northern half of the island consumed most of the 36 days of the campaign. But thanks to a photographer's luck and skill, in capturing a second in time, the second battle, the Southern Battle, would produce the iconic photograph most associated with Iwo Jima. And I'd like to talk about that for a minute. 4 days after the initial invasion, D+4 on 23 February, Marines of the 28th Regiment fought their way to the top of Mount Suribachi. A series of events then unfolded that would result in the iconic flag-raising picture that all of us know so well. At 10:20, the first Marines to crest Suribachi raised a small American flag. Watching from a point further down the hill, the commanding officer of 228, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, he didn't feel that this first flag was adequate. He sent the word up the hill that he wanted a flag large enough that the Marines at the other end of the island would see it. He hoped that it would lift their spirits. Shortly thereafter, a much larger 8x4 flag was provided from a Coast Guard LST on the beach and carried up the hill. When the second flag arrived at the top of Suribachi later that afternoon, it was attached to a large piece of iron pipe that had been found. Under the leadership of Marine Sergeant Mike Strank, 4 Easy Company Marines attempted to force the iron pipe into the unyielding volcanic rock atop Mount Suribachi. Seeing their struggles, a 5th Marine and a sailor moved up to help. As the 6th struggled to drive the pipe into the hard ground and raise the flag, nearby Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal snapped a picture and captured the moment. That picture would soon be above the folds above almost every paper in the United States. However, the immediate effect on the combatants was exactly what Lieutenant Colonel Chandler had hoped for. Tens of thousands of Marines across that tiny island, they looked up at Suribachi, the highest point on the island, and they saw Old Glory. The weather had just cleared and it was a bright day. And when the flag came up to the vertical and the Pacific wind caught it and it unfurled and showed its stripes, it touched off waves of cheering and shouting from exhilarated shore party Marines on the beaches below Suribachi. The sight of the flag was equally a shot in the arm to the exhausted and hard-fighting forward battalions of the 4th and 5th Marine Division. As those of you who were there remember very well, even at this early point in the battle, the fighting had already been ferocious. In the first 3 days of the fight, 4th and 5th Division had lost over 4,500 Marines on the beach and seizing initial objectives. Casualties among the officers and staff NCOs were particularly high, but in the best Marine Corps tradition, NCOs stepped up as needed. Some would later call Iwo Jima the Sergeant's Battle. Aboard the Navy ships surrounding the island, whistles, horns, and bells rang out. Sailors cheered, as did many thousands of Marines who were still embarked. Most of the Japanese defenders, though, they didn't see the flag go up. Those brave men were buried deep in their bunkers, their tunnels, in their spider holes. But we know from the memoirs of the very few who survived the Battle of Iwo Jima that they heard the cheering of the Marines on the surface and that the word of the raising of an American flag was passed by word of mouth from Japanese soldier to Japanese soldier. And those who survived would write in their memoirs that the knowledge of an American flag atop Mount Suribachi, it sent those doomed men a message of inevitable defeat. And it also told them everything that they needed to know about the nature of the American fighting man that they were scrapping with. United States Marines had come to their island. It was a great moment in American history. And I know for some of you today, the image of that flag on Suribachi, it remains as crisp as ever, even though other details of the battle, it's probably safe to say, have faded a little bit over the last 71 years. The story has been proudly told many times, but it never gets old. What I'd like to do now is just take a minute or two to talk about 2 Marines among the many thousands who watched the raising of the flag atop Mount Suribachi that 23rd of February. If I can please ask for a little bit of indulgence from you. The first was my own grandfather, a 31-year-old lieutenant colonel by the name of Charles Bierman. On D+4, 96 hours into the battle, he was still embarked east of the island on the USS Auburn. He would go ashore the following day with 3rd Division. Charles Bierman was assigned as the landing transport quartermaster for 5th Amphibious Corps. So his job was to plan and oversee the movement of thousands of assault echelon and follow-on echelons of landing craft originating from many thousands of Navy ships. To the degree possible, they needed to hit the beach at the right time and in the right sequence. It was an almost unimaginably complex and challenging responsibility. Fortunately, Iwo Jima was not my grandfather's first rodeo. The previous summer, he had accomplished the same task for 3rd Marine Division during the assault on Guam. Now, I should probably stop right there and mention that those skills that allowed my grandfather to complete that tough task, those are not skills that are passed down genetically. Chris Starling talked about the fact that he and I went to AWS together, but if any of my AWS instructors were here, they could give sad evidence of the uninspiring landing serial worksheets that I completed while I was at Quantico. Probably the less said about that, the better. But Charles Bierman had a lot in common with the other Marines who fought on Iwo Jima. His early life was not easy. He was a Depression-era kid from a broken family in Mentor, Ohio. There was no money for college, but he was fortunate enough to gain acceptance into the Naval Academy. By the time he arrived on Iwo, he'd spent 3 years fighting his way across the Pacific. To the end of his days, he was fiercely proud of having worn the cloth of a United States Marine, and in particular, of having served on Iwo Jima. The second Marine I want to tell you about undoubtedly felt the same pride as my grandfather and the others who watched the flag raising. But for him, the flag raising was an intensely personal and emotional experience because he knew that it was his platoon atop Mount Suribachi. 3rd Platoon, Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines. 23-year-old platoon commander, Lieutenant Keith Wells, was forced to watch the flag raising from the hospital ship Samaritan because he had already been badly wounded in the initial frontal assault on the bunkers at the base of Suribachi. Assigned a key role in the initial assault, Keith Wells had led his platoon from the front. Springing from a shell hole on D+1, he had charged up the base of the mountain and his Marines followed. His fearlessness would earn him a Navy Cross. The citation describes his leadership and fighting spirit as materially contributing to the destruction of 25 Japanese fighting emplacements. In the process, Keith Wells was wounded multiple times and evacuated to an offshore hospital ship, but his platoon would continue the assault in his absence. As he watched the flag waving from the deck of the Samaritan, Keith Wells' pride soon gave way to anxiousness and to anger. The tangible evidence that his beloved Marines were fighting without him and still in danger was almost too much for him to take. Shortly thereafter, he convinced a corpsman to provide him with a small supply of sulfa powder and morphine, and he snuck ashore so he could rejoin his platoon. Once he reached the base of Mount Suribachi, he was helped to the summit and reunited with his Marines. The reunion, however, was short-lived. When his battalion commander, the indefatigable Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, learned that he was back ashore, he was unamused, and he promptly ordered Keith Wells to relinquish command of the platoon and return to an aid station. Sergeant Ernie Boots Thomas again took command of the platoon until he was killed in action on 3 March in fighting on the northern portion of the island. Keith Wells would ultimately survive Iwo Jima and live a long and meaningful life. Sadly, the same could not be said of many of his 3rd Platoon Marines. Of the 40 who set off to raise the flag on the morning of D+4, only 6 would make it through the battle without being wounded or killed. To his final days, Keith Wells was rightly celebrated as one of the foremost heroes of the Battle of Iwo Jima and the leader of the most decorated platoon in the history of the Marine Corps. As many of you know, Keith Wells passed away about 3 weeks ago in February, just a short time before the 71st anniversary, but he was a Marine for the ages, and he will be missed. Today, as we remember proudly that magnificent moment when the American flag flew over Iwo Jima, we also recalled the 3 flag raisers who died in the battle without ever knowing of their place in one of the most memorable moments in American military history. Sergeant Mike Strank, Corporal Harlan Block, and PFC Frank Sousley. When President Roosevelt saw the flag raising saw the picture of the flag raising shortly after it was taken, he gave immediate orders that the 6 flag raisers be pulled from the battle. And it's a testament to the ferocity of Iwo Jima that 3 of them had already been killed in action before they could be pulled off the line. In similar fashion, as we gather here today, we honor the memory of all 6,821 Marines and sailors who fell during the Battle of Iwo Jima, many of whose names you still hold in your heart and soul as you sit here today at this luncheon. We honor the 19,000 wounded and those like flag raiser Corporal Ira Hayes, who became casualties upon their return home. And we also honor the memory of those 23,000 Japanese soldiers who died fighting on Iwo Jima. We raise our glasses to the proud survivors of the battle who have left us in the years since. Your friends, brothers, and family members, all of our friends, brothers, and family members. Men like flag raisers Corporal Reen Gannon and pharmacist mate John Bradley, and men like Major Keith Wells and Brigadier General Charles Bierman. The memory of those who has left us burns as brightly now as it ever has. And finally, I want to end by saluting those of you today who fought on Iwo Jima during Operation Detachment. You and your departed comrades wrote a remarkable chapter in the history of our Corps. In the spirit of this gathering, I offer again the words of General Joe Dunford last year on the 70th anniversary. He said then, "Your legacy is the young men and women who use your example of courage and commitment to inspire them to confront and overcome the challenges they face today. I pledge that today's Marines will keep the spirit of Iwo Jima alive." Thanks to all of you for being heroes then and now. Know that as long as there's a Marine Corps, the example of the Marines of Iwo Jima will inspire Marines to do great things in the service of our country. Thank you for allowing me, my wife Beth, to be here with all of you and to be a part of this. God bless you, and Semper Fi.
To the men of Iwo Jima and to your legacy. Cheers. The Iwo Jima stamp was designed, printed, and issued 138 days after the battle, the shortest production time for any U.S. stamp and the record that still stands today. On the first day of issue of this stamp, July 11th, 1945, people stood in lines stretching for blocks to buy the stamp and made it the best-selling stamp in U.S. history. That sales record, 137 million stamps, stood for 48 years until 1993, only to be succeeded by Elvis Presley. You can't escape the power of rock and roll. So with that, we have a limited number of these stamps, and one of them is in a frame that I'm going to present now to General Bierman, and it's signed by General Myatt, who's joined us. Sir, welcome. And it commemorates this wonderful, wonderful talk that you gave today. Chip, thank you, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, General Myatt. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.